presentation, a short discussion on the effects and the challenges of COVID-19 on airport regions. Allow me to start with a quick view on what is happening and where we are. As you've seen, you can see from the picture on the right upper side, we've seen an unprecedented drop in aviation activity, about 89, 90% in Europe, which is possibly the biggest drop in aviation history. It's felt worldwide, but Europe has been particularly hit. As you can see also from the picture below, on 4 May, the aviation market of Germany was smaller than the aviation market of Vietnam, which is quite interesting sight. So we've seen dramatic drop of activity. Things are starting to recover again, but we are in a situation of uncertainty. All stakeholders, regions, airports, airlines are uncertain about what will happen in next months, in next years. Some of the questions is how profound and enduring will be the economic recession that has been created by the quarantines and lockouts across the world. Another significant question is what social patterns will remain and what will be quickly forgotten. For sure, many of for sure and for the good, possibly many of the behavioral patterns we have seen and we are facing these days will disappear. But what will remain? Is teleworking going to remain as a default way of working for many people, or we will go back to our offices? Another question is about the political and geostrategic shifts that can be triggered by this situation. We can imagine that many countries will close their borders, restrictions on travel, restrictions on trade are likely. What all this will affect the movements of people and goods is still uncertain. And finally, how the COVID will leave the aviation landscape is quite intriguing. How many airlines will survive? How they will restructure, etc. So allow me to say that it's not a good time for answers, so don't expect many answers from my presentation, but this is a good time to look for the appropriate questions and identify the challenges. We have identified 9 potential impacts and challenges related to COVID and the aftermath of COVID on airport regions. You can see these 9 impacts on air connectivity, on willingness to fly, on the airport experience by passengers, on airport operating companies, on airport-related employment, on airport development projects, on landside developments, airport cities, impacts on landside mobility, and impacts on environmental policies. At the end of the time when we will discuss each impact, we will make a poll and we will ask you to give us our score about the importance of each of these impacts. So we will provide you, let's say, 30 seconds, maybe half a minute, not more than that. And we expect that you provide your inputs, your feedback on that. Let's start on impacts on air connectivity. The good news is that so far, no major airline has gone out of business. A few are on 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 Chapter 11 in Latin American. A few are being bailed out by governments, but basically, major players are still in the market. However, this is a long-term struggle, and then we may think that there are some likely survivors and some likely losers. Possibly the likely survivors will be flag airlines that can benefit from government bailouts. However, it will be interesting to see which are the strings attached to these bailouts, since in many cases they will target at protecting some national interests in terms of home hubs or home airlines when we are talking about airline alliances or airline groups. A second group of survivors are likely to be very lean and cost-effective airlines, which are sitting on a cash pile. You can imagine who I'm intending to mention. I will not mention the specific name of airline, but you can imagine which one is this. And possibly also some airlines which are serving specific niche and captive markets, islands, small countries, etc. What we are expecting in the next months is that airlines will resize their network and their fleet, sometimes accelerating some long wave trends. We've seen Air France that it's calling back the A380 fleet. Also, they are retiring some older aircraft. This is a trend that will be happening across the industry. It's likely that we will see the number of destinations and frequencies being reduced in the short and medium term. Maybe in the long term, we will recover the range of destinations we had before the pandemics, but no one is sure of that. And possibly we will see the concentration of airlines in major hubs in the quest to get economies of scale. So for airport regions, the outlook is that some of the players that were and are operating in our airports could be out of business, or maybe they could be uh, redeveloping redeveloping their business. So airport regions and airports should need to develop different strategies. Also, we expect some airlines lobbying for strategic partnerships. What I mean about that, it's discounts, incentives to serve some markets that are perceived are not being so interesting for airlines. So let's continue with second impact, the impact on the willingness to fly. I have made the distinction between business and leisure travel because the logic behind are quite different. We've seen these times that many of us have been teleworking and teleconferencing for now maybe more than 2 months. And we've seen that it works. So it's likely that we will keep on doing that, and that the frequency of business travel can be reduced. In any case, it's obvious that not all activities can telework and teleconference, but possibly it will have an impact in the future. Regarding fairs and conventions, we've seen most of the activity being called off in these months. Possibly it will recover in the following months, but for sure the concept of the whole industry will be overhauled, and maybe some mega conventions will be maybe reduced or rescaled. I'm anticipating, but it's maybe it's a guess that possible winners of this situation will be business aviation and executive class in standard airlines. Why that? Because possibly the number, the frequency of travel will be reduced, so that people who have not, I would say, top positions in the ranks of their organizations would find a way to discuss and talk and work without traveling so often. But social distancing and some kind of top business people will still need to meet the customers, meet their clients, meet their boards, meet with people in their branches in other countries, and possibly these people will use more flexible and less hassle, and look for less hassle that is offered by business aviation and executive class. Possibly rail will also be a winner, but it should show competitive fares. In some market it does. In some market, uh, flying has been cheaper than taking railways, than taking high-speed rail, and has to prove also good credentials of reliability and hygiene credentials. It seems that aviation is taking hygiene, safety very seriously, as it did with the previous crisis, the 9/11 crisis with security. Aviation takes these issues very seriously, and is not always followed with the same standards by other modes of transportation. So we need to see that. So what I expect for business travel, well, that new ways of working and meeting have been tested, so it's here to stay, and that means that it will have possibly significant impact on the geography of business hubs. What I mean by that is that maybe you will not necessarily need to have lots of international flight connections to everywhere in the world to become a business hub, a vibrant business hub. See a few of them. For instance, the Silicon Valley has not a major international airport, has San Francisco, Oakland airports, but they don't have a major hub nearby. Also, for regional and local authorities, a possible lesson is that their connectivity may lose some weight in the equation describing local global attractiveness. Why that? Because possibly teleworking, rail, other uh, other ways of traveling, and other ways of business people relating, interconnecting among themselves will make business travel less relevant. Regarding leisure, uh, what's likely to be expected is increases in flight tickets, higher costs as effects of higher costs, and less competition. Unfortunately, I'm expecting less competition. Uh, Also, passengers will think twice before taking a plane because we will have a new layer of hassle at airports, which will be uh, health screening, etc. So possibly short and very short trips may be less appetizing, at least for the short and medium term. I mean, these weekend trips anywhere. I'm going to take a plane for a short visit to see to watch a concert or opera concert, or maybe go to dinner anywhere and come back next day. Possibly it will become less appetizing in the following months and maybe years. However, there are no substitutes to some consolidated sun and beach and must-see destinations. Uh, I don't expect that Northern European uh, workers, travelers, will simply keep to go to beach in Northern Europe, and they will avoid going to Spain, to Portugal, to Greece, uh, to the Canary Islands, to Corsica, etc. I don't expect that to happen, and I don't expect that must-see places like Paris, London, Venice, Florence, Rome will have a huge impact. But less consolidated holiday destinations that have less consolidated tourism appeal may need to redefine and to reinforce their value proposition. Also, we need to take into account that there are millions of people in Eastern Europe, in Central Asia, in Africa, in Latin America, that are still willing to fly, that have very rarely taken a plane, so they are eager to visit Europe, to visit our destination, so they will do that. However, possibly they will require that airlines, airports, and destinations reassure them about hygiene and safety uh, credentials. Also, we need to take into account some trends that we've seen in the past. For instance, the flight scam, which is the shame to fly that is happening among many people in Northern Europe and in many other places. We've seen also that in some countries, for instance, in Japan, people is less and less eager to move abroad, to travel abroad. So these are developments that we need to have a close look to them. So we think that destinations, regions that are tourist destinations or business destinations may need to try to redefine their value propositions. To reinforce their attractiveness in a scenario that possibly people will travel less frequently for leisure than in the past. Next, impact about airport experience by passengers. As said before, we will have health protocols that will add more hassle and possibly more longer waiting times at airports, so that moving in an airport will become still dear as it used to be in the past. Also, maintaining social distance in some crowded airports will be a huge challenge. If you see at the right hand of the slide, you can see Heathrow Airport and New Istanbul Airport. For sure, you can tell which picture reflects Heathrow, which picture reflects New Istanbul Airport, right? So in times of social distancing, uh, space will be an advantage. So a risk is there that some passengers may opt to use newly built, wider, more spacious airports for connections, which unfortunately will affect uh, European hubs, which tend to have smaller terminals, tend to be more crowded than some new airports built in the desert. Possibly also more time will be required to ensure flight transfers. That will impact on flight schedules, and also it will impact on the flight times. So flying will take more time. That will also be an additional hassle, an additional difficulty felt by passengers. For regional authorities and for airports, we will have a new star. We will have a new stakeholder that will have a key role to play, which are national health and quarantine agencies. They were already there in international airports, but nobody knew that they were there. I wonder how many of us, how many of you frequent flyers had ever been asked a question by a health officer in an airport? Possibly never, or maybe in some airports in Africa or in South Asia. But they were there, but nobody took notice. Now their standards, their protocols, how they operate, their methods will have a huge impact on the passenger's experience. Just to give you an example, a couple of years ago, the personnel, the outsourced personnel screening for security in Spanish airports went on strike on August, and this break havoc in Spanish airports with hundreds of cancellations, thousands of people grounded at airports. So we will have another filter, people taking temperature, taking questionnaires, etc. So what will happen if they go on strike, or if they are very pricky? We don't know. We don't know, but it will have an effect. Also, we can wonder about retail and food and beverage. Possibly outlets will need wider space, will need to provide contactless ordering, enhanced cleanliness, etc. So my wonder is if all this will make these places still attractive or not. Uh, it's up to you. It's up to you, but for sure, I think an impact is there. However, and again, I think in history, air transport has proved very good credentials in adapting to new requirements. It was in the past for security, and it could happen now for health. So it might happen that passengers can prefer taking air transportation, as they could uh, it could be healthier, and the perception of health, of being healthy, of keeping distances, etc., can be higher than, for instance, trains. So here again, the regional local authorities uh, are struggling to have an impact on these issues. Unfortunately, regarding passenger experience, their cloud has been usually in the past quite limited. So, but the impact is there, because the impact a passenger has of each the airport at arrival can affect the perception of the whole destination. So an opportunity is there to explore new ways for engagement with stakeholders and all the actors in airport ecosystems to improve cooperation for a higher airport experience. Impact on airport operating companies. What we can expect is less revenue, both airside and for landside business, retail, food and beverage, car rental, etc. What we can also expect is that more airport surface will be required to ensure social distance, which is a non-remunerative activity, and possibly less space will be available to retail, food and beverage, etc., duty free. So some imagination to make the commercial footage more remunerative will be needed for airport companies. Also, possibly they will need to invest in terminals to ensure social distance in some crowded areas. And will have more operational costs for cleaning, disinfecting. That will not be much, but obviously it will impact on operational costs. Also, we might expect a negative impact on credit ratings for airport companies. Their financial outlook will be less positive since there are so many uncertainties on the aviation business in next years. So airport companies will be impacted for sure. Maybe not at the same degree as airlines, but they will have an impact. So the possibility is that some type of bailout will happen as well as with airlines. We need to take into account that the public sector still has many stakes in many European airports, so bailouts are possible. And also we might expect that airport companies and regional local authorities will need to renew their, let's say, partnership contractual frameworks in terms that maybe some charges, some benefits from airports to regions and from regions to airports will possibly be renegotiated in the following months. Regarding airport-related employment, as with airlines, we anticipate drops in airport-related jobs across all ranks in airports in the short medium run. This is unfortunately this will happen. In the positive side, maybe some new kind of jobs in sanitary contactless airports may arise. So I provide you a guess. Maybe you can discuss that, and maybe you cannot agree on that. On the likely fields where we may expect job losses and fields where we may expect job gains. Possibly passenger handling will see losses since airport operations and the interface with the passengers will become more and more contactless. We expect also losses in airport retail, food and beverage, basically because less travelers, at least in the short medium run, possibly less willingness to spend their money there. We may expect also losses in onboard catering, as some airlines have announced announced some drastic reductions on onboard catering. And fortunately also in pilots and crews, since we expect a reduction in airline activity, so possibly less pilots and less crew will be needed, at least in Europe. I'm not talking elsewhere in the world where maybe demand for pilots and crews will still be very important. Regarding gains, possibly more people involved in passenger screening, cleaning, disinfecting, IT, everything related to operation screening and contactless technologies, and also possibly in logistics. I'm putting this because, yes, air cargo has been impacted as well, but not at the same degree. And some of the trends we've seen across the pandemic, one of them is e-commerce, depends quite a lot on logistics and quite a lot on logistics and logistics companies that are located near or inside airports. So our recommendation for local authorities is to keep alert to spot opportunities since they might arise, and in case adapt training and job programs for that. Regarding airport development schemes, airport expansions, so we expect that many expansion projects will be put on hold for a while. However, some investment will be required to ensure social distancing in terminals. And also, we will see that some trends, such as the retirement of mega carriers, the A380, the B747, will involve some adaptations in aprons, in fingers, in some airports. So possibly this will be a time to maybe to redefine or to rethink the conventional dialectics between airports that are always willing to expand and local authorities reluctant to accept airport expansion, possibly in a time where airports will think that bigger is not, and bigger in the sense of more traffic, more volumes is not the only option, may be better, so more profitable, more reliable operations could be rather more advantageous. Regarding air-related landside developments, I mean airport cities and similar projects. It seems that a trend putting in challenge the core value proposition of airport cities are happening. Teleworking, if we do more teleworking, we need less office. If we travel less, especially if business travel is less, maybe less hotels at the airport may be required. So the core value proposition may be challenged. This is a guess, but it might happen. And also some pre-COVID trends may be accelerating. I give you 3 examples. Some airport cities were aiming to become kind of airport villages in the sense that they aim at providing good quality, urban quality, good services, places where that were comfortable for working, but also maybe for living. We saw also that activities, business located in airport cities were having weaker and weaker links with aviation. So little distinction between an airport city and a conventional business park in a suburb in any major city. And finally, we saw in some places that residential uses were allowed and were being considered as key elements in airport cities, something that was unthinkable many years ago. We have the example of Helsinki-Vantaa Airport, but also other airports were seriously considering some kind of residential uses in airport cities. So that might be reinforced in the sense that residential is not so affected to effects to trends against offices and concentration of people in working places as business business parks and similar developments are offering. So I expect that if the airside the business of airports is more challenged, so less revenue, maybe airport companies will take more interest in landside real estate developments, in new developments, but also in their already built up developments, and may be very active trying to attract companies to their properties. Maybe also entering with competitions with other centralities, other business parks in the suburbs or even in central business districts. So as a summary, I expect the redefinition of the concept of airport city, and yeah, I just launched an idea that if airport cities are expecting to become real cities, new facilities like schools, health, community centers, etc., will be needed, and then the contract and also the notion of airport city and its relation with the surrounding local authorities will need to be rethought. We've said that airports are facing big challenges to ensure social distancing, to organize flows, etc. But the same challenges are being experienced by major multimodal hubs, for instance, train stations. So in this sense, airports are not radically different to other multimodal hubs. The problem is that in some airports, we have at the same place a major station and a major airport. So the challenges will be still more complex because different modes of huge hubs of multimodal transportation are happening in a relatively small area. This is likely to make a movement more complex, more cumbersome, more hassle as well. Since many passengers will refrain from using public transportation, a surge in the use of private car is likely, at least also in the short and medium term. So the attractive or airport car parks will be a highlight. This is car parks for airport companies. It's low cost, low value, but quite remunerative business. But it takes lots of valuable land in the vicinity of airports. So again, also we might experience that some public transportation lines to and from airports may become unsustainable because of decreased demand and because of difficulties that many public transport systems across the world and across Europe are facing. Not just to say the recent story about Transport for London, uh, well, announcing that they would stop and close stations unless they were bailed out by government. So as a lesson and a recommendation, I would suggest that local authorities be attentive so that the backlash in the use of public transportation does not remain after the pandemic, because maybe the risk is that many years of effort to develop public transportation as a default mode to and from airports could be undone in a few months and a few years. The impact on environmental policies. So the question here is that emergency relief and economic development policies that are being put on the table by many governments across Europe have the risk that the interest in climate change, climate emergency, decarbonization will drop in the priorities of politicians. It might also happen that bailout airlines and low-cost carriers will start fare wars to stimulate demand and trigger some kind of allow me to put it in this way, irresponsible wave of tourist travel. I mean, what we saw some years before at the start of low-cost carriers, when you could travel to somewhere in Europe for just €5 or €10. So it was cheaper to take a plane than to take maybe the bus in your city. So it could happen. I'm not sure if it can be as dramatic as I put it, but it could happen. And cheap petrol and some subsidies to tourism and to attract visitors could also enable this kind of activities. Also, we might expect that in a more nationalistic world, flag airlines, major airports will be perceived as national champions worth being supported, irrespective of any other consideration, including environment. Fortunately, it's not happening so far. We've seen that French government and the German government have attached some environmental strings to their aid packages. But again, I think we should be attentive. And here, the role of local governments and regional governments is important, since they have pioneered in the past in striking balances between environmental agendas and aviation development in the past. So I would expect that COVID and the pandemic is not an excuse for losing ground and moving backwards in this direction.
Ignasi, the first question was what do you think about the future of the general aviation, or how general aviation will be hit by COVID-19?
I have to say that I'm not an expert on general aviation, so I don't have a very founded opinion on that. To my sense, general aviation in not business, maybe general aviation in terms of leisure general aviation, not business aviation in terms of where the transport component, the transportation component is the most relevant. Here I expect that it will be reinforced. In terms of leisure general aviation, I don't have an opinion, but I don't expect COVID will have an impact at all.
Okay, there has been another comment regarding that if people are afraid to take public transport, as you pointed, what is a trend, and in all aspects, and for sure to go to the airport, if this will maybe create big problems to some airports. What do you think about that? And this can be how local governments can arrange that situation.
Yes, for sure, for sure. I think that the risk exists that some health conscious and wary people will refrain to use public transportation to move to airports, to move to and from airports. Uh, I think in the short term, it is likely to happen. In the medium long term, possibly it will be reduced, but in the short term, it's likely to happen. So a surge in the use of private car will be happening. So what can regional and local authorities what should they do? Well, possibly not not give ground too quickly and to pressures demanding more space for parking, more available areas for kiss and fly, etc. So try to keep the criteria uh, they had so far. Maybe they need to be flexible at some point, but don't become enablers of this development, because at the end of the day, we have to be to understand that there is no alternative to public transportation to airports or to anywhere in big cities. Uh, for this, we need to look at Asia. In Asia, they are more used than us in pandemics, and still people in China, in Korea, in Hong Kong, they take subways, they take trains, they take uh, all public transportation, because there is no other option to move vast amounts of people in big cities. So the issue is there. So I think what is needed is not to get into panic and reverse policies that have been moving and have been developed quite step by step in the past years.
And finally, Ignasi, last but not least, we have got a question regarding if you think the programs, especially European programs for green aircrafts, are going to be stopped, or maybe Airbus will think now is the time to, because they have no, looks like all the orders of standard planes have been stopped for the news we have got, all of us, and that maybe for a long time they are not going to make this type of, they are not going to get orders of these standard planes. If you think it's an opportunity, or Airbus especially, and well, all aircraft companies, but especially Airbus because it's our European company, uh, will do or will follow that path quicker, or it will stop too.
It's difficult to say. I think programs, research and development programs regarding green transportation in general, uh, in air transportation or any mode of transportation, should not be stopped, because at the end of the day, the 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 climate emergency is a long trend, uh, and it's something that needs to be countered. So no discussion on that. The pandemic has been has had a very strong effect, but possibly it is something that will be uh, forgotten in a few years. So I think the priority for environmental policies should not be abandoned, and and this including also green aviation.
Thank you, Ignasi. Thank you for all these answers, and thank you for all your presentation. As you can see, here is in your screen the contact email address of Ignasi. So anyone who wants to keep the conversation and to ask more questions, he was open to show it. So please do it. As I said before at the beginning, we are going to have his presentation in our web in the following days. So if someone wants to see again and to check what was in the screen, you will have the opportunity. I will just for the comments that Ignasi has shared with us, I think for regions and for local authorities, he has shown some questions, very interesting. As he pointed at the beginning, no answers. There are no clear answers yet. And who says that? I think maybe he or she is not saying the truth, only a truth that is in his or her favor. But I think he has pointed a clear moment that probably a few of you are already dealing. The islands are telling you, well, we have to reduce our fleet for obvious reasons. So if you want we to fly, well, you have to help us. This was often an action and a negotiation with not so important cities and regions, but probably now in Europe will be more regions that for the first time they have to deal with this situation. And after, when the situation is clear, I think he pointed a very clear point what will be about the territory around the airport that supposedly was needed by the airport activities or other industrial or commercial services activities that they were linked with the airport. But if this airport has not, let's say, the same connectivity clear as the Samazan in the future, for any reason, how the region and how the local authorities will handle with this land. It's clear that, as Ignasi pointed, the airport authorities will focus on that because it's another way to get new revenues. In that, we have a lot of examples in Europe, as you know, and you maybe suffer or enjoy. And cities and regions and local authorities will have to think, what about that? What about this land that it was supposed to be for the airport activities if there are not so much airport activities or not airport activities at all? So I think some cities have gone through that process, how to redefine the airport and the airport territory when the airport has moved to another place like Munich or Oslo or Berlin. But other ones, maybe it's the first time you have to deal with. And I think it's a very important question issue about that. So it's 1 minute to the new deadline that we fix, 4:15. So thank you all of you to be here with us. As Operation Council, we do really thank you. And we are thinking to have another webinar next month in June. We have not cleared the date and the speaker, but we will go back to you soon with this information. Thank you very much.